If you are going to be playing in any of my D&D in a Castle games in 2025, stop watching this video now! This video contains references to other videos that contain extreme gore, extreme violence, strong language, and so viewer discretion is advised. Hey, welcome to Guy to Adventures. My name is Guy, and today we are figuring out how to gain inspiration, what to do in terms of creating our adventure for DARKMOOR Fortress, which is the adventure that we are currently creating, designing, constructing, building up in this next series of videos. We don't have a hill with swamps around it and ruins on it to wander around in. We know that. So what do we have? Where else can we turn to? In this video, I'm going to be talking you through a whole bunch of films that you can turn to for some very visceral inspiration. We need to start somewhere, and the swamps around the castle are the first point of contact that our heroes could arguably encounter. There are two films that come to mind that really give you the experience of swamp. And the first film I watched when I was a plucky 10-year-old, because in the 80s, apparently this kind of film was absolutely suitable for kids. I'm talking about The Never-Ending Story and the Swamps of Sadness. The link for this video is down below. It is a scene from the Swamps of Sadness, one of the most famous scenes in terms of filmic history for traumatizing teenagers and kids. It is disturbing to watch. No one was hurt or harmed in the filming of it, I know this much, but it gives you an idea for what to do with swamps. The notion of sadness being a thing that is causing the characters to sink into the swamp rather than quicksand and that sort of thing means that it changes the type of adventure roles that we're asking for. We're no longer asking for dexterity saving throws or constitution saving throws as characters are trying to push their way through the swamp. We are now asking for wisdom saving throws, charisma saving throws. We're making the characters dig deep into why they shouldn't lose hope. I think that's a very interesting idea, so I'm going to park that in our toolbox of things for when we come to design the adventure. Another swamp that we can turn to, this time a much more light-hearted approach to swamps, but still an interesting take on just this boggy, marshy ground. We're going to turn to The Princess Bride. This movie was so inspirational on so many different levels. I believe that this is how most of my D&D games actually run. A mixture of seriousness, super coolness, and ridiculousness. And the fire swamps, they take first prize for inspiration. The rodents of unusual size, I mean, awesome. Absolutely, absolutely awesome. And the fire traps with the warning sound that comes in, that warning sound, if you as the DM are sitting there and you suddenly start going, your players are going to go, are you all right? Do you need something to drink? And then you go, right, everyone make a dexterity saving throw in this 30-foot radius. You all take fire damage as a big pile of gas explodes underneath you. The players are going to freak out, the characters are going to freak out, the scouts and rangers and stuff are going to be doing their nature and survival checks to frantically figure out what the hell's going on. But 5 minutes later, as the game is continuing, you suddenly start going, the players are going to lose their minds, they're going to start going, and we scatter, we run in all different directions. Great. I'm going to roll a d8 for a normal scatter, see who's on that scatter plane, and off we go. You have to make a dexterity saving throw against fire. ROUSs, rodents of unusual size. Absolutely cool idea. Playing with scale of creatures. These aren't just regular rats. These are giant rats. These are nasty kind of things. Really, really, really nasty. So those two films, in my thinking, give us some very cool insight into what we can do with swamps other than just making them bogfests. Now we need to go into the caves. The caves under the castle and village are something that we need to explore. And for this one, if you thought The Never-Ending Story was bad, Well, these next two films, if you're like me, you shouldn't watch them alone, at night, or in the dark. The first film that we need to look at is The Cave. Now, if you suffer from any kind of claustrophobia or fear of drowning, The Cave is not for you. It's a cool story. Some Templars found a thing, they sealed it, and a group of archaeologists go to unseal it and see what's going on. Ha ha ha! Well, things go from bad to worse. But it does show us an aspect of caves and cave diving that not a lot of us are exposed to. The notion of submerging yourself into water in pitch blackness and then swimming, hoping to find an exit at some point, that's nerve-wracking. That is so... I do not understand why people would do this in real life. So that gives us a sense that we should have these swimming challenges, perhaps an extended task of some kind, a skill challenge, whatever you want to call it. Let's look at how do we make that a component. Now, in the castle that I built, I wanted to add in the water effects and stuff, mainly because I was just curious to see if I could do it. But then when I added in the giant lake, I was like, oh, what could I do with this lake? Well, if that cave system leading up to the lake is flooded completely or has deep channels that suck the players into these cave-like structures, these little boulder spaces that they have to come up for air and then keep swimming, that could be really, really cool. It could be a moment. It could be something really fun. You want to go swimming in plate mail armor? Really? You sure about that? Okay, great. Disadvantage on everything. The other cave movie that you should or shouldn't watch, depending, is The Descent. Now, The Descent is much less psychological horror and much more just traditional straight-up horror fest. It is a fun movie to watch, provided that you don't take it seriously, that you don't plan on going on any holidays with a bunch of girlfriends or into caves, you know, just the usual kind of stuff. What I like about this, though, is it shows that you should be playing with light. Now, I know a lot of D&D races have got dark vision. They can see in the dark. Great stuff. So that means predators will have evolved that are hidden in dark vision, but not in light. So that could be really, really fun. It's also a demonstration of our characters experiencing these weird attacks and things, but not from complete alien-like things. These are mutated humans. These are troglodytes of the original name troglodyte. So that could be something that we add to our toolbox. That could be something that we think about going, okay, well, what if in this cave it's drow or drugar or something, but they've been distorted. They've been twisted by something. Somehow they've been corrupted. Is there an arbaleth maybe down in the watery cave-like system? Is the water even water, or is it more like slime? That could be something worth investigating. We also need to make sure that the swamp stuff is very separate from the cave stuff. We want it to feel like different environments. Bear in mind, we don't know in which order the player characters are going to go through this whole thing and experience this kind of thing, but we do want them to feel very discreetly different. That then takes me to the actual dungeon itself, the crypts and stuff below the castle. I want to do a dungeon dive. I haven't done one in a while. They are quite fun, but you've got to be very, very careful with them. So what film could we look at that is a dungeon dive? There's not a lot of films out there that I know of, and if you do know of one, please share the link in the comments down below. I would love to know your thoughts on it. I found that Aliens 3 is a pretty good dungeon dive. Lots of winding corridors, doors that open and close and seal, monsters that lurk about and chase the party. That, for me, is a twist up on the normal kind of dungeon thing. You think of, oh, the PCs enter into the dungeon, they're working their way through the dungeon. Sure, let's turn it on its head. What if the PCs are trying to escape the dungeon and there are just a nasty, horrific thing that's following them, or things that are following them that are really tough for them to slay? What makes it more horrific and scary and tense is not the fact that my characters are being stalked by this thing. because players in Dungeons and Dragons have a immortality syndrome. There's so many ways of coming back from the dead. You've got more hit points than most of the monsters, or at least you're doing more damage than they are, and there's a group of you, and However, Aliens 3, it's more about the horrific deaths of the others, the NPCs, that make the whole thing so terrifying. So I feel like one thing that we need to add to our adventure is NPCs. Lots of NPCs that we can kill off in different ways. We can have them screaming and being sucked into the darkness, into the rooftops, into traps, into all sorts of things. So we can build up the tension by adding in NPCs. And the players can see, hang on a moment, we started with 50 NPCs, we're now down to 22, we're down to 12, we're down to 6. Oh my gosh, we're running out of time here, even though it's not a time thing. So I think that could be quite cool for dungeons. Finally, we then need to understand the castle itself. And my thinking is the PCs get this castle. What are they going to do with it? Now, the Bastion system within Dungeons & Dragons is fine if you want basically admin for some small advantages and stuff. I wasn't blown away by it. Next week, I'm going to show you what I did to fix it, because I basically just wrote a whole bunch of new rules. It's what you do when you don't find what you need, right? I feel like a siege would be quite fun. Well done, players. You've managed to survive this far, you've got to the castle, and now you need to hold it from external forces. So I needed some siege inspiration, and there are a lot of movies that detail a lot of different types of sieges. The one that I found inspirational, not so much because of the siege, but more just inspirational for Dungeons and Dragons in general, is Excalibur. I mean, it's just an amazing film anyway, and the siege of Leon the Grance's castle shows you a gritty, muddy, wet, soggy, chaotic space. But the way that it concludes, I think, is pretty awesome. The PC hero basically forces a surrender by the enemy warlord. This isn't a end of siege type of thing. I like the idea of the towers and the pitch, and we get to see all of that, but also the chaos of the close confinement. When you visit castles, they're very narrow. They're not wide open, it's not 10-foot wide corridors. It's 5-foot, if you're lucky, wide corridors. So that's something that I'm going to take away in terms of the siege. Now, the model that I built, it's got pretty wide passageways and things. I need to remember to make them narrow. That's going to make it much more claustrophobic, much more intense. Another film that has to do with sieges, and I'll admit, I had kind of brushed over this movie going, yeah. Now, having watched it, I'm like, wow, this is actually pretty awesome, is Ironclad. Ironclad has a tremendous siege sequence in it, absolutely awesome siege sequence, but it shows the bloodiness, the brutality of it, way more than Excalibur does. Excalibur is definitely bloody. Ironclad takes it to a whole new level. It really, really does. So Ironclad shows us trebuchets in action, it shows us walls exploding and stuff, but what it does show us, and this was really inspirational for me when I was writing my rules on locations and armies and sieging and all that kind of stuff. You look at the trebuchets and the troops assaulting the castle. It is tremendous visual damage that seems to be happening, but the castle stands. Sieges were incredibly complex and very, very difficult things to force. Castles were very well built to withstand sieges. Most of the time, the sieges ended because the castle ran out of supplies, ran out of food. Not because the siege was successful. And it's going to put pressure on the player characters. Hey, we're not gaining ground, but we're not losing ground. However, we're running out of supplies. What are we going to do? It asks an interesting question, which I think is useful for us to park down. Also, visually, the descriptions of rocks just annihilating all of those NPCs that we've been picking off one at a time. I'm now convinced we need an NPC pool that we can slowly drain over the course of this adventure. So those are the films that I have turned to for inspiration. I hope this has given you something to go and watch over the next couple of weeks. Now, if you've got other films that you think are really worth looking at, well, leave them in the comments down below. And remember to hit that like button. It really is useful. It makes everything work so well. Now, the adventure that we are creating, I am going to release on Patreon, as I did with the Wormbeer Abbey. So if you want to grab a copy of this adventure when it's finished, well, certainly head on over to the Patreon link down below so you can grab your copy. Until next week, when we look at what were the rules that I had to create from scratch to handle this adventure. Well, I wish you and yours the happiest of adventure creation.